SurePoint Advisors is registered as an investment advisor with the state of New Jersey. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply any specific level of skill or training and does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by Securities and Exchange Commission or any state securities authority.
Welcome to another episode of SurePoint Advisors Financial Roll Call with James Fay. We are 10-8 in service. This is a podcast for law enforcement by law enforcement. Today's episode will be talking about the importance of setting up an emergency account or emergency fund. In a previous episode, we spoke about taking ownership of your number one asset, which is you and your ability to work, make money, and build wealth. Because this is the foundation on which you build your financial plan, if you don't have that number one asset protected properly, then the chances are whatever financial plan you have in place, it will fail. We also mentioned one of the ways that you can lose that number one asset is by loss of job or getting laid off. This topic is never more important than the environment that we're living in right now and the calls to defund the police. This can certainly lead to layoffs. A few weeks ago, I read an article online about a county down in South Jersey that was getting ready to lay off 121 correction officers. 121. That's well over half of their force. And they were looking to lay them off. So let me ask you this. Are you financially prepared if you were to lose your job tomorrow? If you were to lose your job tomorrow, would you have the finances to carry you for however long it takes to get a new job or to get rehired? So I told you when we first started this podcast during the introduction that I wasn't going to sit behind the mic and talk to you and bore you about all these subjects, that I was going to either use real life situations or interview people that it happened to get these points across. So I was fortunate enough to meet up with a colleague earlier this week, and I met up with Edna Morasse. Edna is a sergeant in a local law enforcement agency here in Monmouth County. This actually happened to Edna. Edna was laid off. So again, I don't want to sit here and tell her story. I'll let her tell it for you. So let's go to the interview that took place earlier in the week. Welcome to SurePoint Advisors Financial Roll Call with James Fay. We are 10-8 in service. This is a podcast for law enforcement by law enforcement. I would like to welcome our first guest to the podcast. With us today, we have Edna Morasse, a sergeant with a local law enforcement agency here in Monmouth County. Edna, welcome. Thanks for accepting our invitation to be a part of the podcast.
Thank you for having me, James.
Sure. Tell the listeners a little bit about your career so far.
Okay, so I started 12 years ago, about 12 and a half years ago, and 2006 actually, and I worked for about 3 years in court security and training. And when I was doing some grant work in training on my third year, and we started to go through layoffs. So I was trying to get grants to keep our officers, and we were unsuccessful with that. And I was one of the 14 officers that our department had to lay off.
Okay. And were you brought back?
I actually was brought back a couple of months later in 2010. So it was a 9-month layoff. Some officers were laid off much longer than that, but I was lucky to be one of the first 3 that returned.
And obviously your career has moved on now that you have that title of sergeant. So.
Yes, I came back. I went back to training and then took the promotional exam, was lucky enough to score well, became a sergeant and went back to court security for about 6 to 8 months, then went to the Warrant and Fugitive Bureau for 4 years. And now I am back in training as a sergeant, getting ready for the next test.
Excellent. Congrats.
Thank you.
Keep those promotions coming, right?
Yes.
All right, so let me ask you, what was your thought process with regards to job security when you first took this job?
I thought being a cop was, well, it was a lifelong dream, and I always thought that that was the one job that had 100% job security. And also the pension and the health care, I kind of thought it was all in one package. And then 2009 came, and I was quickly realizing that dream was not a reality.
So 2009, we were going through a recession, and the sheriff's office decided to lay off 14 sheriff's officers and I believe 36 correction officers at that time. So you were one of the 14 that was laid off.
Yes.
And where were you in your life at that time? Your living arrangements and stuff like that.
I had just got my own house with my future husband, and we had only been there from August of the previous year, so maybe 6 months we were there. And the way the layoffs happened too, it was 2 weeks notice for me. Some officers had 3 weeks notice. So the worst situation, you only had 3 weeks notice to know that you were no longer gonna be an officer.
Sure.
So
sure.
At that time, as I said, he was my to-be husband. We were supposed to get married of June of that year, and everything had to be put on hold.
Yeah, so you had to put everything on hold.
Yes.
So did you have anything in place financially at that time in case something like this was to happen?
I did not. I was
So,
26, 27 at the
right.
time. So, it was my first job. I'm thinking that that's the most money I've ever had in my life anyway. So I thought that I was the best I could be, obviously not knowing about savings, but not spending money either, but just your paycheck goes to your mortgage, to your car, to everything. So when that's taken away from you, you just don't know what to do.
Right. And did you end up getting another job in those time of being laid off till you were brought back?
I did not get another job during that time, no.
Okay, so that definitely could have took a financial strain on things, correct?
Correct.
Right. So let's fast forward. I think it was like 7 months later, the sheriff's office brought you back as a sheriff's officer, and now you're employed going forward. What was your thought process going forward as far as setting up some sort of account or, making sure if this was to ever happen again, that you would have all this covered?
I made sure that I took a step down a little bit with my spending and started to put funds aside so that I could have at least 6 months worth of savings to cover those important non-discretionary items like the mortgage, the car payment, the food, your necessities. And then it was time to start a family as well. So that's the position I was in when I returned.
Absolutely. So you set up an emergency account, 6 months worth of non-discretionary bills
Yes.
on the sidelines in case either a layoff or some sort of emergency came up. So that's great. Great thinking on your part and your husband. So here we are today in 2020, and obviously we're going through, one of the worst pandemics we've ever lived through, obviously, being our age. Is it possible that you might have to use that emergency account that you set up for yourself and your family?
For sure. Who knows what happens with my caregivers taking care of my children right now, and if my husband or I would have to leave work to take care of them. We can't guarantee that second paycheck would be there. I've even just went through having another child, so I had some of that baby bonding time off, which also is unpaid. So having those funds on the side helped me know I can get through the 3 months of unpaid time with him.
That's great. It's very important, especially to be able to spend time with the family and not have to worry about that financial burden if there was no funds. So great. Any other advice you can give to our listeners? Anything you can think of?
I would definitely just, as we have even said before, taking care of yourself, the number one asset. That's what's most important, to be able to take care of everybody else. So you got to protect yourself financially, because who knows, could be another storm, even anything could happen. Pandemic, storm, job, your health. So just knowing that you have a little financial stability in the background, as small as it could possibly be, especially starting off a recruit out of the academy, it's going to go a long way in the end.
Right. Perfect. Great advice for them, for our listeners here. So, well, with that, I want to thank you for being a part of the podcast. I don't want to hold you up too much. I know Sheriff Golden and your family probably want your attention more than this podcast, but the listeners appreciate you giving your input and sharing your story with us, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you, James.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right, great. I want to thank Edna for her time and her input. That was very insightful. Here's a woman that had 3 years on the job, and you just heard her story. She spoke to how when she took that job, she did not think she would get laid off. She certainly thought she had job security, and three years later, she had to change some serious plans in her life, marriage, starting a family, and she didn't have anything in place. She told us that, and she also told us how she adapted when she got back to work. So again, that interview was very insightful, and I thank Edna for her time. It was great. So let's talk about how we protect our number one asset for loss of job. It's by setting up an emergency fund. An emergency fund is simply an account that sets aside funds to be used for unexpected expenses. Okay. Typically, it's recommended that you have 6 to 12 months of non-discretionary expenses set aside, liquid to you in the case of some sort of emergency. What are non-discretionary funds or non-discretionary expenses? Non-discretionary expenses are things that you cannot do without. A mortgage. If you don't pay your mortgage, your house will foreclose and you'll be evicted. Same thing with rent. You don't pay your rent, you're going to get evicted. Food bills are non-discretionary, right? Maybe you could cut back a little, but you still need to spend money on food. That's non-discretionary. You need food to live. Car payments and all the things that go with it, like gas and insurance. You need transportation. It's non-discretionary. You need to pay for it. As opposed to discretionary expenses, which are things that you can live without, such as vacations, entertainment, cable. They're things you can live without. So where should you keep the money in an emergency fund? We recommend that you keep the money in high yield bank accounts, maybe money market accounts, CDs, a Roth IRA, something that's liquid to you. We wouldn't recommend that you keep it in a savings or a checking account. And the reason for that is because the interest rates are so low that with inflation being above the interest rates that you're getting in a checking and saving account, you're basically going broke safely, or you're safely going broke is what we say. So again, with a high yield bank account, which if you go to bankrate.com, they can give you some ideas there, some accounts that you don't have the brick and mortar banks that you go to. They're all online. They can give you a little bit more interest in their accounts. A Roth IRA is liquid to you. It's exposed to the market. So, hopefully you can outpace inflation by being exposed to the market. So simply put, a financial emergency is an unexpected expense that, if not dealt with properly, can have immediate serious consequences. And again, some of these things that can cause that, right? Loss of job, maybe medical emergencies, car expenses, your car breaks down, you need to get some money. You have that emergency fund set up. Major household repairs or unexpected travel. Maybe your parents or loved ones live in a different state and they become ill and you have to get there. That's unexpected travel, and you have an emergency account set up for that. The reason to have the emergency account set up for that kind of stuff is so you don't go to the credit card, because the credit card is predatory lending. And then you'll get into that vicious cycle of credit card debt. So by having an emergency fund set up, it's going to help you relieve unnecessary debt that might be on a credit card. So this should motivate you to start or add to an emergency fund. I need this to create a call to action for you. You need to start thinking how you are going to protect your number one asset, which is you, your ability to work, make money, and build wealth. If you are a current law enforcement officer and you're a client of mine already, this should be a review for you if you're listening. For the law enforcement officers that are listening that are not yet clients, please use Short Point Advisors as a resource. You can call me in the office at 732-876-3777, or feel free to visit our website, shortpointadvisors.com, where you can find my email address. You can contact me that way. If you find this information educational or it has you thinking about protecting your number one asset, then hit subscribe. It will notify you about upcoming episodes. You can also check out the podcast description to see how you can tune in to future podcasts. And with that, I want to thank you for listening to Short Point Advisors Financial Roll Call with James Fay, and we will be 10-7 out of service.